Brexit looks like it's going to happen. We don't know when, we don't know how bad it will be, but we know that it will be a negative for the Irish agricultural sector. And we think there are a number of channels through which that negativity is going to work, unfortunately, from the perspective of farmers and food companies. The first we're feeling right now, if we felt it very immediately, was the change in the exchange rate between the pound and the euro. Since the referendum was called, and particularly since the referendum was won by the Leave side, the pound has lost its value dramatically, and that has increased the competitiveness of British exports to Ireland and to European markets, and also reduced the competitiveness of Irish exports of agri-food products to the UK. And that is starting to be felt in the prices that farmers got this year, and we think it definitely will be felt in the prices that farmers get next year in 2017. Even if we stay at current exchange rates of a little less than 90 pence to the euro. That's the short-run immediate impact. We don't know yet when Britain will leave the European Union, but if they do leave, it will change the trading relationship between Ireland and the European Union. When the UK leaves the European Union, there will probably be some extra barriers to trade between Ireland and the UK. Now, unfortunately, we don't know how big those barriers will be, but potentially they could be very significant. What we looked at today was looking at what happens when we assume some specified negative price changes for cattle, sheep, milk and cereals, and look at some assumptions on what happens to the European Union budget and the CAP budget if the UK leaves the European Union. Now, different sectors end up getting affected differently, and they do that. That happens because the different sectors of Irish agriculture have different reliance on the UK as a market. Sectors like beef, over half of beef exports are to the UK. Mushrooms, almost all of our exports are to the UK. So there's variance. To the dairy side, about 2/5, 40% of exports of dairy commodities go to the UK. So it varies sector to sector. The different sectors have different dependencies on subsidies as well. So any change to the EU budget and the CAP budget will affect different types of farms differently. And finally, the different commodities sectors have different levels of tariff protection right now. So if the UK leaves the European Union, what happens to European markets and to British markets will depend on what's the new trading regime. If it's no tariffs at all, that will be a massive change for commodities like beef. Won't be so much of a change for cereals, where tariffs are already quite low. So for the four main sectors, starting from the worst to the least worst, the worst affected is the beef sector. We think that margins could decline by 37% compared to an average of 2013 to 2015. Now, it's important to remember that this is assuming farmers don't do anything in response to that type of change, and almost certainly they would. But that large negative change comes about from lower receipts, direct payment receipts, lower output value combining to give us lower profitability on a farm basis. Next worst affected is the sheep sector, where while we expect to see relatively small changes in output prices because of a Brexit for sheep markets, they are still heavily dependent on direct payments in terms of income. So what happens to the EU budget becomes very critical for those type of farmers. It's the same story for cereal farmers. We don't expect to see any major change in cereal prices because of Brexit, but those farmers are quite reliant on direct payments in terms of their bottom line farm income. So they would be negatively affected by a smaller EU budget that would come about because of a Brexit type scenario. And finally, the least affected but still negatively affected are dairy farms. They're the least dependent on direct payments of all Irish farm types. Compared to the beef sector, they are less protected, so the implications for tariffs are a little less, but they still see a 20% fall in income compared to 2013 to 2015, because so many dairy farmers have a beef enterprise as well as a milk enterprise, and the value of the output from that enterprise will take a larger hit. And in addition, we need to remember that dairy farmers also receive direct payments, and they will also be lower. So overall, the impact is biggest on beef farms, smallest on dairy farms, but is all negative, unfortunately.